All right, what's up, people? Welcome back. This is the Black Muse Podcast. I am your host, Jason Muse. We are back for another deep dive episode. This is actually part of a multi-episode series on the documentary by Matt Walsh and the Daily Wire. What is a woman? And joining me once again is the man and the legend, Ibrahima. Let's go ahead and welcome him. What's up, Ibrahima? How you doing?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As always, how you doing, everyone? I'm doing quite well today. I'm excited to get back into this documentary. You know, it's quite a piece of art, honestly.
Okay, fair enough. Every time you do your intro, I feel like I should like hold my hands or something like that. I don't know. Hold my hands
the
up. I don't know
blessings
how
come.
y'all.
The blessings come automatically. You don't have to do that. It's all right.
Okay. I gotta
They're
go
built
bow
in.
my
They're
head.
built in.
Nothing. I don't want to be disrespectful. All right. So welcome back, Ibrahima. Before we get into it, I know we're pressed for time a little bit, but I still want to be a human being. How's life? How was your last week?
Good, man. You know, just doing a lot of work on what's it called? I'm learning some data science right now, actually. You know,
Oh, that's
uh,
interesting because you didn't
yeah.
have a gumption for data science when we were talking about climate change, but I'm not gonna go there though.
Yeah, sure. We'll
Jab,
go another round. Don't worry
jab.
about it. Don't worry about it. You know what I'm saying? You know, maybe learn to read some charts. You know, might help you.
Okay. Oh,
You
okay.
know,
I
you
don't know
know.
how to read charts. Okay.
Yeah, seems like it.
Uh, okay. But no, all jokes aside. So the week was cool? I know you're getting into this, but like in general, your week went well.
Yeah, everything's going well. You know, alhamdulillah. You know, that's what we say in the Islamic foray. You know, you every time. Actually, even when things aren't going so well, we
Yeah.
still say thank you to God, just because things could be a lot worse, and
Okay.
you're still alive. You still have a chance to do things. So
Okay. Well,
alhamdulillah,
that's a positive outlook.
absolutely.
Uh, so let's get into the documentary again. What is a Woman by Matt Walsh? Definitely something that is provocative, I think. Definitely something that can be taken as controversial, especially from the perspective of those who sincerely uh, hold, I should say, versions of the beliefs, excuse me, that the documentary entails and that the documentary frames. I would think as coming from the left and frames it in a way where it's kind of being mocked. That these kind of kooky, crazy, far left ideas. That seems to be the best way to describe kind of the tenor with which Matt engages with him normally, and also kind of in the documentary. In the documentary, it's almost like, in my opinion, he's pretending to take them seriously, but not really taking it seriously. Taking it serious enough to come off that way, but like not really taking it seriously in the sense of like sincerely engaging and like thinking like, okay, like if I actually believe this, like what would be like a reason for me to have these beliefs? And I think he falls short of the kind of unbiased, truth-seeking, principled investigation that he frames, because that's it's part of what he's framing it as, but he's always like playing at it. He's not really doing it. I think that some indicators of that, in my opinion, might be that he didn't really have any success stories. He didn't really give the best possible evidence on the side of the view that he seems to aim to kind of dispel or disabuse us of. That's a term that I've heard the governor Ron DeSantis of Florida say. I like that term, disabuse.
I've never
uh,
heard that before.
yeah,
What's that even mean?
to disabuse you of a belief from context clues. I actually never even looked it up, but my understanding of what he means by that is uh, basically I've made it so that you can no longer hold a view that's obviously bad or stupid because I've demonstrated how futile or how false it is. So if I've disabused you of a bad view that you hold, that's what I'm doing. Uh, I'm willing to look it up right now to see actually how accurate that is. Disabuse. Disabuse. Persuade someone that an idea or belief is mistaken. All right. So I think I was pretty good.
Wow,
And I never looked
wow.
that up before, but it was from the way he used it. He used it in the context. I think it was an interview. Some journalist asked him. It was about the pandemic, and I think he was outside of some kind of warehouse. I don't know if it was like air hanger or something, but he was outside taking questions, and they asked him about some policy. They're trying to make it seem, the way they asked the question was so loaded, they tried to make it seem like he mishandled the pandemic, and so he broke some stuff down. And then they didn't even cover it right. The way he broke it down and completely like refuted what their question implied. They did a snippet and made it sound like he said something he didn't say, and then Fox News pounced on that and then exposed the media's manipulation and then made them look even worse.
I don't think I saw that.
Yeah, we'll talk about it next time. But yeah, so that's kind of my general views of the documentary. I'm going to go into details in a second, but I want to start by inviting you to pinpoint a very specific part of the documentary to discuss in detail. I offered you this last time, and we got a little bit into it with the blue-haired lady. But what is there any? We can go back into her view as well. But is there any other part of the documentary that's sticking out of your mind? It's like, yeah, we got to talk about that.
Yeah, so the gender transition surgery, surgeon, I should say, I believe her name was Marcy Bowers. Yeah, Marcy Bowers.
Marcy Bowers, yeah.
Over 2,000 surgeries and counting, Dr. Marcy Bowers is the nation's preeminent sex change surgeon. Surely someone who does sex change surgeries can answer what a woman is. Dr. Marcy Bowers, first of all, thanks for talking to us.
My pleasure.
So you're a world-renowned gynecologist and surgeon. You're also a transgender woman. Can you tell me a little bit about...
Well, I mean, I identify as a woman, but...
You're a woman, right.
I'm a woman with... I mean, that's my life, day to day, but I have a transgender history.
Yeah, I thought she was very interesting. She was very much possibly the most reasonable pro-gender affirmation treatment. A professional that he interviewed in the whole documentary, in my opinion, at least. She seemed like she was willing to entertain the idea that it may be there may be an aspect of social contagion, which I think even with other, I think that's something that's common with almost anything. Like you will always have some sort of social contagion aspect of any sort of trend, whether it be legitimate or not. There are people who will copy behaviors or feign injuries or adopt certain styles just because they'll be perceived a certain way. So it's very strange to me that most of the gender theory proponents or activists are completely unwilling to even admit that that's a possibility, because I think that's something that's common in almost anything you can do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think if you saw that part again, you might change your mind slightly. I do think that you're kind of right in that this person, Dr. Bowers, did say, and this is kind of fresh in my mind because I rewatched it last night, did say when Matt Walsh asked if there may be a social contagion element, Bowers goes, a teeny weeny bit or something like that, teeny tiny bit.
Yeah, that's right.
I forget the exact words.
So you worry that there could be a sort of social contagion element of this?
A teeny tiny bit, maybe.
To me, that could come off as minimizing it, and that might undermine your perception of how reasonable it is. But there was an acknowledgement that it is a factor, that it does exist, where other people who are typically on this side or the same side of the issue, let's say, typically left of center, might deny it altogether. There's no social component, and I think that those people are not very careful because they're fundamentally talking about what they would even argue is a social construct. So there's got to be some kind of social dimension to it, or it wouldn't make sense to frame gender as a social construct unless there's some kind of social dimension to it. It wouldn't make sense to talk about socially transitioning people unless there was a social component to it. It wouldn't make sense to complain about the what I think people left of center would call harassment, persecution, discrimination politically, unless there was a social component to it. So that you can't deny it altogether. And anybody who comes close to doing that in order to try to make it seem as though, oh, there's no social contagion, like people are just born this way, that kind of thing, they're just not being careful. They haven't thought it through. So I don't know how reasonable that is, but I would say, at the risk of contradicting myself, it's not clear how unreasonable anybody left of center in this documentary really is, because we only see what Matt Walsh and his direct and whoever is involved with the production of the video want us to see. And we got to be cautious whenever we're engaging, even in a documentary style film, because what you show, how much of the clips, the way that the clips are edited, what parts of what people say that you show can be edited in such a way as to be deceptive. I just went over an example where Ron DeSantis was framed in a way that was very deceptive. I could give you dozens of other examples where people on either side of the political spectrum were framed in such a way or were clipped in such a way as to make it seem like they think or said something they didn't really quite think or quite say.
We wanted to ask Governor DeSantis about the deal, but he declined our request for an interview. We caught up with him south of Orlando.
Publix, as you know, donated $100,000 to your campaign, and then you rewarded them with the exclusive rights to distribute.
So first of all, what you're saying is wrong. That's a fake narrative. So first of all, when we did the first pharmacies that had it were CVS and Walgreens, and they had a long-term care mission. So they were going to the long-term care facilities. They got vaccine in the middle of December. They started going to the long-term care facilities the third week of December to do LTCs. So that was their mission. That was very important, and we trusted them to do that. As we got into January, we wanted to expand the distribution points. So yes, you had the counties, you had some drive-through sites, you had hospitals that were doing a lot, but we wanted to get it into communities more. So we reached out to other retail pharmacies, Publix, Walmart. Obviously, CVS and Walgreens had to finish that mission. And we said, we're going to use you as soon as you're done with that. For the Publix, they were the first one to raise their hand, say they were ready to go. And you know what? We did it on a trial basis. I had 3 counties. I actually showed up that weekend and talked to seniors across 4 different Publix. How was the experience?
CVS, Walgreens first.
Did you
then
think
it was
this
a
is the way to
trial
go?
run to see who could do it most effectively.
And it was 100% positive, so we expanded it, and then folks liked it. And I can tell you, if you look at a place like Palm Beach County, they were kind of struggling at first in terms of the senior numbers. I met with the county mayor, I met with the administrator, I met with all the folks at Palm Beach County, and I said, here's some of the options. We can do more drive-through sites. We can give more to hospitals. We can do the Publix. We can do this.
So it seems like you said Publix without mentioning CVS or Walgreens.
Live within a mile and a half of a Publix. And they said, we think that would be the easiest thing for our residents.
But Melissa McKinley, the county commissioner in the Glades, told us the governor never met with her about the Publix deal.
Elderly counties, we've done almost 75% of the seniors in Palm Beach, and the reason is because you had the strong retail
footprint.
Can't have
facts on 60 Minutes.
Wow. Our way has been multifaceted. It has worked, and we're also now very much expanding CVS and Walgreens now that they've completed the long-term care mission.
The criticism is that it's pay to play,
and it's
Governor.
wrong. It's wrong. It's a fake narrative. I just disabused you of the narrative, and you don't care about the facts because obviously I laid it out for you in a way that is irrefutable.
Well,
and so it's clearly not.
Isn't there the nearest Publix?
No, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong.
Yes. This was caught red-handed, committing one of the just gravest of all journalistic sins here in this TV news business. Deceptively editing a soundbite to make a politician say something they did not say. The clip came from a speech President Joe Biden was giving for Veterans Day, where he told a story about a legendary baseball pitcher named Satchel Paige. Now, Paige is remembered as one of the greatest pitchers of all time. But due to segregation, he didn't get to pitch in the major leagues until he was 42, after it had been integrated. Satchel Paige is one of the greatest players ever to come out of what are known as the Negro Leagues. That's what the all-black league during segregation. And this is the unedited version of how President Biden referred to him.
I've adopted the attitude of the great Negro at the time pitcher in the Negro Leagues, went on to become a great pitcher in the pros, into the Major League Baseball after Jackie Robinson. His name was Satchel Paige.
Now, Biden stumbles a little, but it's clear what he's saying. Listen again.
I've adopted the attitude of the great Negro at the time pitcher in the Negro Leagues, went on to become a great pitcher in the pros, into the Major League Baseball after Jackie Robinson. His name was Satchel Paige.
All right, so Fox News then takes that bite and they edit the context out of the middle. And I'm going to play it to you. When you listen, watch for where the hand goes. Watch for the vanishing hand. When that sound played on Fox, it sounded like this.
President Biden facing backlash for a comment during his Veterans Day address. Listen to this.
I've adopted the attitude of the great Negro at the time pitcher. His name was Satchel Paige.
Biden's choice of words while referencing Hall of Fame pitcher Satchel Paige, landing him in hot water. The remark came while Biden was attempting to wish Secretary of State Blinken's dad a happy birthday. That birthday wish didn't go so well.
Right, yeah. Did not.
So that was deceptively edited to make it sound like Biden was calling Satchel Paige a Negro, when the Florida context shows clearly not what he said. This part with a line through it is just gone. So that's why you get the disappearing hand, because the hand's up during the first part and then it's gone during his name was Satchel Paige. Now, Fox
and there's the contextual dimension too. So we got to be very careful of thinking this is an open and shut case. And I think we should be vigilant about the extent to which this documentary is kind of rife with bias. I think it definitely is. I think even a trans person, I guess you could consider this person conservative trans person, in Blair White, who's a famous YouTuber, has pointed out that, yeah, this is a biased documentary.
But overall, I think the movie was quite superb. I think the movie was full of important information. I think that the movie obviously did have a bias. You can't get around that. It is a movie created by conservatives and created as a conservative company. However,
and even Blair pointed out that Blair wishes that Matt would have shown some success stories, people who've transitioned and basically, to the best of their ability, lived pretty decent lives, lived functional lives, and dealt with their gender dysphoria more or less well, as opposed to focusing in on all of the negative aspects, the opposite of whatever a success story would be. I guess a fail story. I don't know. That's not quite the phrase. But
I will say I wish they would have also interviewed trans people that are happy with their decision and don't have crazy complications and are living a productive, healthy life, because obviously they are out there. And I think that if you're not showing all sides of the story, you're doing a disservice. But that is to be expected because the movie does have a bias. So you go into it knowing this is a conservative movie, this is a conservative viewpoint, and I can take what I want from it and I cannot take what I want from it. So it is what it is. I also think if they would have showed trans people that are happy and that are normal, productive members of society, I think that that would have done miles more to actually sway people who disagree with them, because they wouldn't get this inherent feeling that the film is only showing one side. Like for me, if I were to watch a leftist film about trans issues, obviously I'm going to go into it disagreeing with a lot of it, but I would have so much more respect for the leftist film if it showed detransitioners, trans kids and the mess that is, complications, you know. That is really my overall problem with trans discourse in general, is that both sides only want to show their side and the nuance and the gray area gets 100% lost. However, I do think that it's a positive thing this film exists. It's full of useful information. It's full of things that I learned.
So I'm going to be poking and prodding and trying to get us to be mindful of that, even though I think that there are some valid points and objections to our medical practice and to the origins of the ideology undergirding the medical recommendations that we have for people who are let's say, dealing with gender dysphoria. As far as you're concerned, though, do you think that the documentary was more or less fair, or do you think that there's some issues with bias?
I think if you are seeing it as, I think it depends, because I think the documentary attacks the ideology a lot more than it does the scientific reality of it. And it uses, well, it does interview scientific professionals. It kind of hinges on not necessarily what the clinical data has been. I don't think there's really been any of the interviews that included questions, you know, about the clinical data as far as the results, pre-op, post-op, during any of these cases, but rather, why is it that we're willing to change definitions, and what do the people who are willing to change these definitions think about it? And in that case, I don't know how Although I think it would be very interesting to see those success stories. I don't think that was necessarily the focus of the documentary or the purpose, but I can see that as a fair critique, because it does seem very one-sided, and the thing is, actually, the documentary unapologetically has a stance. It's that this is kind of a ridiculous ideology, and you can tell by the way. I think you mentioned this before. By the way, Matt Walsh approaches each and every one of those interviews, where he, like you said, that he very much seems like he doesn't take them seriously when he does interview them. And that's something that is very, if you know Matt Walsh and you know his content, you know that he already has made his mind up about whether or not this is to be taken seriously. And that is a very that is the stance that document has purported. I don't think it really tries to portray itself necessarily as being necessarily trying to figure out whether it's true or not, but rather just exposing the most ridiculous versions of this ideology. In that case, I mean, I just didn't expect it to be completely unbiased, to be honest.
Well, I mean, as a moderator, as a person that tries to the best of his ability and fails sometimes, to be fair, to be as objective and neutral as possible because of the epistemological value of that, I would affirm that it's always important to present both sides in the best light possible and then proceed to compare and contrast and grapple and evaluate. And if you start from a position of I have a stance and I'm going to bolster my side as much as possible, but I'm not willing to bolster the other side as much as possible, then it's not clear whether or not you're defeating the other side because you've presented them as weak and easily defeatable. Essentially, you've straw-manned them, which is a fallacy, or that the other side is actually as ridiculous as you're making it out to be. And when you are on the receiving end of that kind of thing, I think it's easier to see how unfair that is. So if you're unwilling to have people do it to you, and I think that Republicans like Matt Walsh, conservative types like Matt Walsh, have no problem complaining when the left does that to their side, then you would do well not to do it to the other side. And so I think that there's actually a failure here by Matt Walsh, by the Daily Wire, in that regard, because they're perpetrating the very thing that they wouldn't allow against them. And I care very deeply about that kind of thing, even though sometimes in my best efforts, I fall short of living up to that standard even as well. A lot of times I think I do it accidentally, though. I don't think I do it intentionally. But with this, it seemed a little bit more deliberate. But it's kind of, I mean, even with that, that's really an inference I'm making, and it's something it's fallible. I could be wrong. Maybe they're just so blinded or biased by their views that they can't see how biased they're being. Maybe they actually think that they're being fair. I don't know. I have doubts, but I don't know. But I want to actually share with you a criticism and read some of it here. I know this is not a current events segment, but I did want to read. This is actually a review that Matt Walsh commented on himself. It's from New York Magazine, and it says, "The right's dangerous, just asking questions, anti-trans campaign is working," by Malcolm Harris. This was, I don't know when this was published. Let me see. July of 2022. So July 6th of 2022. That's when it was archived. So I want to read some of this, and I want to see what you think of it. This is from the perspective of somebody left of center, obviously. This is, I presume, somebody who is in favor of the latest and greatest medical science concerning what they call gender-affirming healthcare or gender-affirming care. And they perceive fundamentally any kind of naysaying, any kind of pushback, any kind of counter-arguing, and any kind of documentaries of the form that Matt Walsh is generating as inherently just anti-trans. You're just basically bashing trans people, which is already a negatively impacted or marginalized community. And so you're just adding to the marginalization when you do this. So it's, this article is very much framed in that. And this person is attempting to call Matt Walsh out for hiding his horrible, unintelligent, Christian views and masquerading as an unbiased person in this documentary. So I want to read some of this, and I want to see if you think the criticisms, at least some of them, are fair. Okay. And it's going to start with this interesting point about language, which I think has problems, but let's read. Over time, words change. Stretched by the practicalities of real world usage, our language warps and evolves. It's an organic, unavoidable, and even auspicious process. But occasionally, we're liable to lose some valuable meaning we can't easily recover. When that happens, it's worth consciously deliberating as a society what we're doing and why, lest the river of language carry us somewhere we don't want to be. The phrase, quote, to beg the question, is a good example. Now, this is actually interesting that he chose this of all the things as the example, because I feel like a better example might have been the shifts of the word meaning of the word woman. I think he's going to go on to touch about it, but his example is begging the question. He's actually going to use this strategically in a way that I actually didn't expect at first. So the phrase, quote, to beg a question is a good example. As it's commonly used today, to beg a question is to suggest it by implication. So to beg a question is to suggest it by implication. It's commonly used today. An empty display case begs the question, who stole the diamond? But the phrase's origin in poor 16th century translation of Aristotle's Petitio Principi fallacy, what should have been assume the question became beg the question. Today's use may be less complex, but a side effect is that we have a hard time talking about begged questions in the original sense of assertions cloaked in the form of inquiry. Okay. And he means to make this claim about the question, which is the titular question, the titular question, the title of the documentary, what is a woman? That he's saying that's question begging in this negative pejorative sense, which is an assertion cloaked in the form of a question. So Matt Walsh is guilty of asserting a particular kind of understanding. Perhaps we could imagine it as the traditional understanding of what a woman is in the form of a question. New anti-trans documentary, What is a Woman, begs its title question, not in the sense of suggesting it, but in the fallacious way of assuming its own answer. Despite mountains of evidence, the movie's producers and on-screen guide, right-wing pundit Matt Walsh, and I want to emphasize the way that this person is being described, because that's not an accident. Right-wing pundit Matt Walsh do not believe that people can change their gender. So this is, I love the way that's phrased because it makes it seem like people who believe that you can't just change your gender are the ones who are insane. It doesn't say that explicitly, but it rings of that tone, and I just love that. I think that that's delectably ironic. Actually, as Walsh reveals by the end, he doesn't accept the human's expressed gender at all. He hand waves at chromosomes once or twice. he hand waves at chromosomes. Those pesky chromosomes. I'm sorry. The tone of this is just hilarious. He hand waves at chromosomes once or twice, but he leans hardest on common sense. There are boys and girls, men and women, males and females, penises and vaginas. The opening credits feature voiceover recordings from antique sex ed lessons, and they are meant to be authoritative.
Forget trying to figure out women. The real question is, what is a woman?
As you grow, your body changes from that of a young girl to that of a woman. Soon, Molly will be a young woman, having dates, going to dances in lovely romantic dresses.
The boy's shoulders are broad and his body muscular, while the girl's body is more curved.
I'd like to know more about different kinds of hormones.
Presence of these hormones in the blood brings about many changes in the bodies of both boys and girls.
Being a woman is one of the things I like best about myself. I think you'll like it too.
I don't know how fair that is, but it is true that the opening does have as a kind of embellishment, like a montage of like those really, really old sex education films. And I do think they suggest or imply a lot of things. They are doing some subliminal work, to be fair, but that ain't what he relies on for his argument, though. But whatever.
I do see what he's saying with that, though.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some fair. I think there's some fair criticism there. I just think the way that this does it is not the best way.
Yeah.
But by disguising a religious precept as a reasonable question, I'm going to repeat that. By disguising a religious precept as a reasonable question, right? The religious precept being the assumed definition of what a woman is, presumably. Walsh and his team have set out to win new friends and encourage existing allies at the same time. So this is what the evil, no good, very bad Republicans are doing. It's an effective strategy, and the majority of us who understand the factual existence of trans people can't afford to ignore them. So this us versus them, like there's a lot of subtle things being communicated in this that I really want to explore with you. I'm going to read one more paragraph, and then I'm going to open it up before I come back to it because I want to hear your commentary. Matt Walsh is a Christian, which I think is actually factually correct. And he believes that his God is the source of our shared single nature. He also believes that his God is my God and your God and everyone's God. God exists. God is existence. God is reality. God is permanent, inexhaustible, and God is identity. I don't know where he got that from. I don't know that Christians believe that. Maybe Matt Walsh believes that. I don't even know what that means. But okay. The origin of our own identity is found in God. Well, I guess like God made man in his image, that kind of thing. That's a Christian precept. And so that maybe has some implications, some interesting implications theologically for identity. So maybe something like that is what he means, to steal man in a little bit. I do think that Christians do believe that man comes from God. And so our origin in God has maybe some implications for our identity, where we're identified as these things that come from God or something. We're made in God's image. So maybe, yeah. So maybe that's an important identity marker. It's awkward because it doesn't necessarily imply anything about gender per se, but there's some interesting presuppositions about gender, I think, in those precepts that God is referred to as he, etc. But well, let me finish the paragraph and then I want you to jump in. Sorry. The origin of our own identity is found in God. He writes in 2017, the unholy trinity, blocking the left's assault on life, marriage, and gender. So Matt Walsh wrote this. In transgenderism, as he calls it, always in scare quotes, man achieves his final victory over truth, and truth's God. So this is like, I guess, ranking Matt Walsh over the coast for his Christian views. But his Christian views were nowhere in the documentary, which is interesting to me. But he's like, the whole point of this is Matt Walsh is secretly a conservative, but he's pretending to be objective in his pursuit in this documentary, but he has a secret hidden Christian proselytism agenda. Is kind of implied here, if not stated outright. Let me stop there because I hear what you have to say. What do you think about the scathing review so far? We just got into the intro.
Okay, so the whole that was very marking, like waving at chromosomes.
He just kind of did a Trump. He just kind of no chromosomes, no fake news chromosomes. They're not respecting.
That's so funny because they're usually the ones that hand wave chromosomes, like saying that it's actually irrelevant to the question completely. So I don't understand what the critique is of what's it called, of Matt Walsh. If he does mention them as something relevant, that's something that they usually mention as something irrelevant to gender identity, right? Am I getting that wrong?
I think you're basically right. Let me try to do my work here, and I want to be sincere. Although I was kind of being tongue in cheek before, I'm going to try to steelman this. I think there's a way to steelman this. So I think that a core contention of those who are left to center, who sincerely affirm or uphold this gender ideology, is that there's something inherently oppressive about the idea that one's biology, and particularly the presence or lack thereof of specific gonads, the presence of a penis, the presence of a vagina, that determines your gender. There's something inherently oppressive about it, because what it does is it boxes up people in ways that they ought not be boxed up. That the whole contention is that gender identity is more fluid than this kind of binary categorization system. It is the binary categorization system that itself foists a whole bunch of social expectations and pressures on people that they don't find naturally, or that they're not naturally inclined towards. That's a core contention there. And so to steelman the position a bit, I think hand waving at chromosomes is supposed to imply this reference to what people leftists to call biological determinism, which is inherently oppressive in their view, for the reasons that I just tried to articulate. And so hand waving at chromosomes, basically affirming the idea that your chromosomes determine your gender, is a problem. It is to affirm a particular kind of bias that negatively impacts trans and non-binary people who exist. People for whom fitting into these nice binary categories is something that is not only extremely difficult, but is intrusive and unnatural for them. And we ought to be accommodating to them because it is intrusive and unnatural to them, indeed oppressive for those reasons. I think that's the best way to steelman it, or at least describe or articulate the view with fidelity. And I think that instead of saying all of that and explaining all of that, this person assumes an audience that already understands that. And so the hand waving at chromosomes is a quick way to kind of gesture at that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can see how that could have been what they meant. Although that very same line of thought is something that I've always had a contention with, because even the people who do transition and go from one gender per se to another, really all they do is change aesthetically in order to fit the stereotypical expectation of that opposite gender. Or sometimes you have the non-binary who essentially chase almost like an androgynous. Usually, if it's like a man transitioning into a non-binary person, they're going closer to the feminine, stereotypical expression of either lifestyle, behavior, and fashion. And with women going into the non-binary space, it's more of a melding into the more masculine tomboy look, which I don't think is necessarily, I mean, either way, you're just mixing stereotypes. And if you're calling the stereotypes oppressive and then still trying to conform to them, how are those things? I just don't see how those two things can all be not only ideals, just depending on where you are, where you're coming from, and at the same time, oppressive categories. Like I feel like that's kind of an oxymoron almost. Like,
well, that's interesting to me. And now I play devil's advocate. A lot of times, I don't sincerely believe the views I try to steelman, and I try to make it clear when I'm doing that. But right now, I'm actually sincerely exploring because I actually don't know where I stand on this. So it's an interesting question, and I'm about to get philosophical, so hold your seatbelts. But like, hold on to your britches. But like, I feel like it's an interesting question. To what extent trans and non-binary people are intentionally mixing stereotypes per se, versus they're just expressing themselves the way they feel naturally, and we or other people who are observing this behavior or the observable correlates of various different behaviors are interpreting what they're doing that way. In other words, are you looking at trends based on whatever your limited observations are of trans and non-binary people, and are you saying that, what you're essentially doing is mixing stereotypes because that's how you're interpreting what they're doing, versus are they actually seeking to do that? That's an interesting question. And it may be a question that at first strikes you as trivial or like not all that interesting, but it's interesting to me because it's getting at a blurred line between interpretations of people's behavior versus what their actual intent for their behavior is. And those aren't the same thing. And so I think that makes it hard to tell. There's some ambiguity at the very least there in terms of what people are actually intending to do versus how we're interpreting them. And we may be misunderstanding what they're doing. There's a potential there for that.
But the whole issue with dysphoria is that you believe that you are a certain way that is not confirmed by your biological reality.
Gender dysphoria, I wanted to define it from the DSM-5. A concept designated in the DSM-5 as clinically significant distress or impairment related to gender incongruence, which may include desire to change primary and or secondary sex characteristics. Not all transgender or gender diverse people experience gender dysphoria.
If I'm getting that correct. Now, I can't tell you what it's like to feel like a woman, because I don't think that's something someone could tangibly say, that they can say like, hey, I know what it feels like to be like a woman, because it's like, or at least to be a female. This is not something that I can possibly experience per se, because it just comes along with so many other biological realities that I've never experienced. I can say, for example, that I feel like I would want to be treated as a woman. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I think that's where the distinction with dysphoria, as far as the definition, is much more accurately portrayed. It's like you feel like you should be viewed and treated as a woman, as opposed to I literally have a feeling, which is not necessarily the same thing as being a woman. For example, you can convince yourself of whatever, and it's affirmed only by what other people think of you and how you may look like that person, i.e. the gender reassignment surgeries, the fashion. That confirms.
That's part of it, but that's not. Is that the other part of it? So now I'm actually pushing back in a sincere way, because I have some genuine pushback against what you just said.
But the aesthetic change and the perception by other people are the two things that we're getting at when we're talking about gender affirmation.
But I don't think we're only getting at those. I'm also thinking, I think that a big part of gender dysphoria is our conceptions of ourselves. So that's the subjective part.
But that's what those two things address. It's like
no, but there's a psychology. Yeah, they interact. I grant that. But what I'm saying is it's still separable from the other two. That's what
I understand. I'm saying the purpose of those things is to alleviate this disjunction between how you feel and what your biological reality is, and to remedy it. And this is their I don't know of any other treatment that they're talking about other than the change in fashion and aesthetic and the way other people treat you. These are the only two things that I've heard ever to be used as treatment for that psychological disjunction. Do you understand what I'm saying?
But those would be the social or politically relevant correlates to an acknowledgement of who you are, though.
But do I need to acknowledge that you have dreads for you to have dreads? It's like there are certain things about you.
You don't need to acknowledge that I have dreads for me to have dreads.
So then, if you are a woman,
you need to acknowledge, for example, that. Well, what I'm saying. So a better example that's more analogous might be it's going to turn on race, and I can go to a gender one if you want, but like acknowledging that I, as a person, a black man with dreads, am not inherently prone towards criminality in virtue of my aesthetic, because that is an aesthetic that has been associated with a certain kind of disposition towards criminality or a disposition towards violence, and so acknowledging that may not be true of me and treating me as a person and taking me on a case-by-case basis might be something that I would say relative to my racial identity is something that would affirm me as a human being, as an individual. I'm not like all these other people that look like me.
Sure, but like, to stay on the same strain as far as like assumptions about what's it called? The prevalence of like violence within a certain gender or the other. Like, that is something you can actually assume between men and women. Like, the presence of testosterone in your body as a fact, it makes you more prone to violence. It makes you more prone to committing crimes. Like, that's something that I could actually say for a fact. We know that.
The presence. So the relationship between testosterone and aggressive behavior has been well documented. But to go as far as to say that because I am male, because I have testosterone in my body, that makes me more prone towards violence is controversial as fuck. Because what it implies is that in some sense, I'm more likely to hurt people just because I'm a male. And that engenders a kind of sexism that I think we don't want.
No, but
hold on. First of all, there's a lot of diversity in the aggressive patterns of the behavior, the aggressive behavioral patterns of males. Period. So there are a lot of males that have a lot of testosterone in their body who don't do shit to people, bro. And so, like, the claim that you just made makes it seem as though I'm like, there's a reading of the claim that you just made that could be used to justify always operating under a sense of like having your guard up with respect to men because men have testosterone. And I think that that's inherently problematic. And that would be the most analogous kind of problematic reading of a claim like that. That would be analogous to the kinds of things that we have a problem about in like when we talk about race and race discussions, like the fact that there's statistically black people disproportionately commit a bunch of violent crimes. If you read into that statistical fact and then see a black person randomly on the street that looks like me, and then think as a police officer who has the ability to shoot me if you feel I'm a threat, that I'm a threat because statistically people who look like me are more likely to be a threat, and then you shoot me for no good reason, that's a problem, is it not?
I think there are a few other like decision-making processes that go between that assumption and that actual result. I think
there better be.
There are way
problematic
more.
As
yeah, but I think in this example, it kind of cuts out all of it and makes it seem like that people actually make decisions solely based on that one assumption. And I don't think that's true. I think that's one data point that goes into a myriad of other decision-making processes that one person would make. And what's it called? As far as the expected behavior of someone, even if they are not presenting as a man, they are statistically more likely to be violent than someone who is biologically a woman. Like, that's something that, and you pointed out correctly, there are differences between men themselves, but the gap between men and women is gigantic.
But if you are one of the people,
but especially if we're looking at people who are committing crimes and who are being either arrested for violence, fighting, whatever it may be, or even if you look at schools, I'm sure you've seen this. Like what percentage of girls get into fights versus what percentage of boys get into fights?
Yeah, I understand. I'm not denying the statistical data. What I'm saying is problematic about it is for the people who do not meet the expectations that citing those statistical trends produces. Right? You always have an opportunity for a person to be misidentified or misguidedly presumed to fit a pattern that is a general pattern but not a universal one. And every time that happens, it introduces the problematic nature of bias with respect to people who fit those identity categories, right? This applies with respect to most identity categories, including but not limited to gender identity categories. Okay, so you have a segment of the population, however statistically rare they may be, of trans and non-binary people. That's what we call them colloquially, for whom they do not fit certain kinds of gender norms or presuppositions, and like it's problematic in analogous ways to expect people with certain kinds of biological realities to act and behave in certain ways that for at least a segment of our population, that's not natural to them. And it's not obvious what exactly is the matter or what exactly is problematic about the ways that they are inclined towards behaving with respect to how they dress, with respect to how they present themselves, with respect to how they identify, indeed, with respect to even their sexual proclivities. We had a huge preoccupation with the sexual proclivity piece, which undergirds the whole gay rights movement. And now some people feel that this is kind of a natural extension of the last dying vestige of particular kinds of prejudices regarding our social expectations around how men and women are supposed to behave. And a lot of those expectations are actually heavily influenced by thousands of years old religious traditions and precepts in the West. And a lot of people who no longer buy into those religious precepts don't buy into those expectations. So there's a lot to unpack here that's going below the surface that I'm trying to draw out explicitly in order to get you to see the nature of the problematic nature from the point of view of people who have these views. Go ahead. I don't want to.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Although I would push back on the fact that these have their origin in religious precepts, because there are biological realities that determine or limit your ability to do certain things efficiently. And efficiency.
No, I'm saying a lot of the social and cultural expectations are influenced by.
Influence, not an origin.
Not determined. Well, no, but they're influenced by thousands of years old presuppositions about what it means to be a man and a woman in God's eyes in some traditions, right? And that's true in the West. That's definitely true in the West. It's not that it's the sole determining factor. It's just that it's influenced by it, particularly in the United States of America, dude.
I think it became more sophisticated through the lens of religious practice.
It may be in certain ways, but in other ways, not so much, right? Because our religious understanding of the world was pre-science. So
I understand that, but
there's a lot of clashes to our understanding now.
But science doesn't tell you how to value things. It doesn't tell you how to behave. That's not the answer.
Science can inform, but science can inform those kinds of questions.
Sure, but those questions are subjective.
Definitively answer them. The questions aren't subjective. What do you mean?
Those questions are value. Value is objective.
Yes, there is an objective component to values. Otherwise, how could you?
No.
How would you understand moral precepts unless you had some kind of objectivity to moral values?
No. Value in itself, like what you consider to be important, what you consider to be valuable, what you consider to be unvaluable. That is
what an individual subject considers valuable is subjective, but value full stop, I wouldn't say is inherent.
You're jumping ahead as far as moral values. I'm talking about value.
I know,
which actually undergirds moral values later on. But if we're talking about what someone considers,
a whole segment of philosophy called axiology, I believe it's the theory of value, what the nature of value is. And what I'm telling you is that there are conceptions of value, full stop, apart from moral value, whereby it's not the best way to it's not obvious that the best way to understand that the nature of that kind of thing is that it is inherently subjective, is my point. That's a view.
So you're saying that there is an objective value, for example, like an objective.
I'm saying that there is a conception of value whereby it makes sense to talk about it having an objective component.
Which is?
So like that water is valuable to human beings in general would be hard to say is inherently subjective unless you mean subjective in a more abstract sense, not as an individual subject, but as subjects writ large that are of the type of human being. But anytime you talk in generalities, it becomes really weird. It's a weird conception of subjectivity. So that might be a quick example just off the top of my head. But like the fact that creatures that need water to that degree, objectively speaking, that the foundation of their valuing that substance is objective, kind of implies a kind of objectivity to their value, or an objectivity to why they confer value on that substance. Right?
So we're talking about human beings as an abstract group rather than an individual human being, where we know
that's my point. But
there are people.
Unless you're talking about, unless you're talking about an individual, it doesn't really make sense to talk. If you're talking about value writ large, unless you're talking about an individual subject, it doesn't make sense to talk about value as inherently subjective. That's my point. So if you're talking about a group of people, right, or a group of beings, right, it doesn't even have to be one type of being. It can be like all of the animals on the planet Earth, like Earth beings, like that. Those kinds of beings value water or confer a certain kind of value on oxygen or something like that, given their physical makeup. Like it's weird to talk about value in subjective terms like that when you're being general. But that was my only point. But go ahead.
No, I get you. But just to that, also, it's like, why are diamonds more expensive than water when they're completely more necessary than
water is more.
Water is much more necessary than diamonds. It's like that has to human beings. Like water is far more important than diamonds, but it costs a lot more which is what we use to determine, how much we value something within an economy.
Yeah, but the reason why is because it's way more abundant. So if diamonds were as abundant as water, diamonds wouldn't cost that much either.
But that's what I'm saying. But also, if nobody wanted diamonds, they wouldn't cost that much either.
Yeah.
It's like,
you know how abundant water is on this planet, bro.
No, I get you. But that's what I'm saying. Like, there is a relationship between not only like how common something is, but also how many people want it. Because if water becomes useful for other things other than just drinking, it will absolutely because the supply is going to be starting to be more stressed by a higher demand for other purposes.
Yeah,
which are not.
In fact, water is valuable for other purposes besides just drinking it. But yeah,
no, I get that. But if as more and more, if like for example, we found out.
I understand your point. I'm agreeing. I agree.
Like it will also change the value. It would raise the value of water and on its own. If we found and also if we're gonna we're talking about value, and it can really only be interpreted on the individual level. Like the group is an abstract. Either way, there's going to be variation within a group. It's like just like you were saying earlier, it's variations between someone's like propensity to commit crime or whatever it may be, even within men or women, between men. No, hold on a second. Let me finish my sentence. What's it called? There is a difference in how much someone values water for their own consumption from one person to the other. Yeah, there are people, you will hear people say, "Oh, I don't like to drink water." They'll drink other things.
I agree.
But to say that as a human race, just because it is necessary as part of our biology, and we can replace it with other things. People get it from fruits or whatever it may be. But as a human race, that is an abstract category. Even within a religion.
So, but value is an abstraction.
Hold on a second. But even in a what's it called? Yeah, but we're talking about groups of people acting on this abstract concept. Like, let's talk about individual people that make up a religion, that make up a belief system, whatever it may be.
Why do we have to talk about individuals? Why can't we talk about abstract groups?
Because action happens at the individual level. The collection, like the basic unit of action happens at the individual level.
Basic unit of action. So action is an abstraction too, and action in general happens at multiple levels. There's not one level to understand action. You can understand human action in general. You can understand human action on an individual basis. You can understand human action in the past. You can understand human action in the future.
But Jason, without
there's not one way to analyze action.
Without the analysis of the individual, you can't even abstract to a higher level. It's like the individual makes up as the basic unit of it.
You could talk about action happening in a certain part of your body with respect to your biological mechanisms. Like your heart pumping could be abstracted as an action that is taking place in your body.
So can an atom.
And your neuron firings in certain parts of your brain can be taken as action happening in your body.
That's fine.
My only point that undermines the point you're trying to make is that there's different levels at which to talk about action. You could talk about action happening at the level of quantum realities, bro. Like what? Like action is actually every bit as much abstract as you think groups of people are. If not more.
For example, is that like a conscious decision? For example, with intent,
is what
we're talking about.
Beating?
Yeah, we're talking about. Yeah, we're talking about action in the terms of human beings acting with intention based on what they believe.
No, okay. So maybe that's what you intended, but what you evoked was the concept of action. And what I'm saying, there's not one way to understand.
But Jason, I obviously wasn't going to the subatomic level with this, and we're talking about a very specific context here, which is value.
Please try your best to get my point.
No,
I'm not accusing you. But you're misunderstanding me. Let me just say this. I'm not accusing you. Wait. Let me be clear, dude. Let me be clear, real quick. I'm not accusing you or attributing to you falsely anything you don't actually think. The point of bringing up those examples was to illustrate a point I'm making. The point I'm making is that there's a whole bunch of different ways to talk about action precisely because it is abstract. There's not one way or one default way to talk about action, which is what you're saying. That's what I'm denying.
There's
only one way or there's a default way to talk about action.
I was talking about. I'm talking about. Yeah, where did we start with this? We were talking about religious values.
Yes,
and the origin
it's inherently subjective.
It's inherently subjective because, and I'm talking about science versus religion and the questions that they're asking. and they're asking questions that are subjective, like what the best type of behavior is, or the best thing to value is. Because there are religions like mine, for example, where like material reality in itself is something that we do not value as much as the afterlife. As a matter of fact, it specifically talks about the fact that the Jannah, which is our word for the afterlife, heaven, you must put that over the dunya, which is earth, the material reality. This is not something that you can objectively derive from measuring things. This is a completely subjective value.
Then on what basis is the moral force that you ought or you must value that thing over this life come from, then, if it's not objective?
Well, actually, it is a decree within the religion from God himself. Like, this is something that God himself says in the Quran, that this is something that is temporary.
But if God said it, how could it not be objective? Like, okay, if it's a moral prescription from God, how could it not be objective?
No, but that's the thing. It's like, do you believe or not? Like, you have belief, and that's faith within that what's it called? Within that belief system.
I understand faith as a form of Christian, but
I get that.
my point is
but the whole point of faith is believing in something that you cannot tangibly prove. I don't know if you have some other definition.
That's fine.
Of faith. Otherwise, that would just be objectively
I take
pointing
your
at something.
definition. I take your definition. I'm not denying your definition at all. I agree with it. But what I'm trying to point out is, according to your own presuppositions religiously, and Christians have an analogous one, if you don't believe the thing that is regarded by the faith to be true, then you're wrong and you're subject to all kinds of eternal penalties. Right?
Well, within if that does happen, well, which is I think we call it like shirk, which is like denying or like believing in other things other than God. You will very likely meet a very sore end in the afterlife. But that's something that I still have faith in.
I understand that.
I don't get how that switches.
True though, that it has to have some objectivity to it, dude. Like,
but point to it, please.
I can't point to it. Your whole point about faith is that
but hold on.
But my point is, and that's interesting to me because you spent a whole bunch of energy talking about falsifiability in the context of climate change. But I'm gonna leave that alone. But like what I'm fundamentally trying to get you to understand. I understand it better than you. But here's the point I'm making. Here's the point. I don't want to get distracted with that.
But hold on.
Let me underscore the point. Let me underscore. Dude, you were done talking. Stop it. Let me. You can have the last word. You can have the last word. You can have the last word. Let me just finish this point. The point. You can go after me. You can have the last word. Let me finish the point. The point I'm making is you're operating under religious presuppositions, taking faith into account. You believe that it is the case. In faith, you believe it. Without being able to prove it, you believe it. But you believe that it is the case. That if you violate certain moral dictates by God or Allah, that there are certain kinds of penalties, eternal damnation penalties, type penalties that you are subject to. And if you abide by them, which is why praying 5 times a day and all of the other religious prescriptions that come from your faith, that's part of why you do that, that you are subject to all kinds of eternal rewards, right? If you believe that, if you take that for granted, even on faith, right? How could you not understand that to be objective in any sense? Either it's objectively the case or it's not, right?
Is objectively the case that we believe this?
No, it's objectively the content of your belief either is objectively the case or it is not.
Oh my, okay. So I don't understand how you're making the connection between objective reality and measurable reality, things that no matter what you believe can be shown. Like, I don't understand how you're making that point with something that I cannot prove, which is my faith. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? It's like, if you're saying objectivity, if you have to be able to measure and demonstrate it no matter who believes it. That is the whole point of science.
Things can be true. You can have an inability to measure something and it can still be true. So in the age of pre-science, before we developed the technological capacities for
measure and demonstrate.
Okay, so in pre-science era, before we had the ability or the capacity technologically to measure a whole bunch of things we can measure now, presumably we couldn't measure any of that shit. Yet it still had an independent objective reality, though, which is what enabled us, to discover it in the first place. Once we developed the technological capacity to measure it, bruh, That's the point. So
And
like that, if you're
please tell me
believing that
how-
something exists on faith, so if you're believing that something exists or there's an objective reality with concerning theology or matters of God on faith, right? It's either objectively true, the content of your belief, or it's not. There's still objectivity implied by that, dude. That's the only point I'm making. This is a very simple point I'm
Okay.
trying to make.
And again, you keep cutting this out where I said measure or demonstrate. You know, it's like whether or not we were able to measure gravity.
I didn't
or
cut that out.
gravitational
I
force.
spoke specifically to that point.
No, but hold on. Hold on a second. Whether we were able to measure it or not, or how much gravity impacts the Earth, or how much gravity pulls down, as far as like the forces that it pulls, what's it called, objects to the ground with, you could still drop an apple and show anyone, whether they believed you or not, that the apple would fall if you let it go.
Okay.
I cannot do that with my faith per se. I can make reasonable arguments about it depending on depending on the subject. I can make like reasoning argument as
So
to
your
why
faith is unfalsifiable?
That is actually the definition of faith. Like
so your faith is unfalsifiable.
Yeah, that's what that means.
Okay.
Like
you still believe
it? Yeah, that's called faith. That's what that means. Like that's literally what that means. It's like the whole point of the falsifiability principle is that if you are designing an experiment, you are going into it assuming your hypothesis might be wrong, and you are going to design an experiment which will prove your hypothesis wrong. So therefore, you're going to say, well, if this happens, then that means my hypothesis is wrong. And in the context of climate change, you have yet to show me something that is like, wow, if this happens, that means my hypothesis is wrong. Like that. I
showed you several things. So
really,
okay, I don't want to go back to climate change.
But I'm not trying to go back to the point of climate change. But the point is, like there are things that are unfalsifiable, and there are things that you cannot prove objectively. You absolutely can't. It's like there is no point at which
like the inexistence of God.
Excuse me. Yeah,
like the inexistence of God.
Like God's existence.
Have I demonstrated I understand what
unprovable.
falsifiable means now, since I came up with that example and not you?
I mean, that's what I've been saying this entire time, but you came up with that example. Seriously?
Now, I literally,
I literally just said, I literally just talked about for a few minutes how like the literally religion and values of religion are unfalsifiable. Like what
you never mentioned the inexistence of God as an example.
Okay,
before,
that's
right?
fine. Okay.
Okay, cool. So have I demonstrated I understand falsifiability now? So now you can't accuse me of not understanding it.
In this context, sure.
Okay, I just want you to concede some stuff. Okay, so here's the thing. We're gonna go back. We're gonna go back to Jenny.
But I actually never even got to my original point. Like we've been having this.
What is your original point?
My original point was about individual decision making and individual beliefs. How those things are driven by values that are subjective and that change drastically depending on what you believe. And these things are not the same thing as like for example, as far as what we can tell to the best of our knowledge is true through scientific objective measurement. Those things don't really ask the same questions, and which is like, what should you value? Like, what do you think should be the best way to behave towards your in-laws, for example? It's like, is that a question that science necessarily is able to measure? Like, this is the best way. The
question of what should you value is not a question that scientists can answer. They can only inform that question.
But that's the value judgment.
The question of what do people value is clearly an observable thing, and science has a lot to say about that.
But that's not the. But you can measure that. You can ask somebody what they value, but you can't. You can't say.
Part
like, what should you?
Which is part of what makes values generally objective. That's my point. So there's an instantiation of objective. There's an objective instantiation of what. There's an objective instantiation of what things are valued. Right. Right. Okay. So that's an example of a component of values writ large that is objective, which was the only point I was making. You're talking about values as if the only way to understand them. Hold on, almost done.
No.
You're talking about values as if the only way to understand them is that they're inherently subjective. And my pushback was, there's a whole bunch of different ways to understand values, and a lot of them encompass objective presuppositions. They wouldn't even be intelligible to us unless we assume some type of objectivity to them. That's my point.
But you made that point to get at what?
I made that point to undermine the claim that you were making, which is that there's only one way to understand these things. You're talking about abstract concepts that can be understood and analyzed in a whole bunch of different ways.
Hold on a second. You're talking about something that I never even said. You're saying that that's the only way that it can
literally.
No, hold on,
you
stop.
said the final analysis
Jason, let me
of
talk.
values.
Jason,
I have it recorded.
What values are to people? Like the fact that people have values is something that you can measure. What the best value is not something you can measure.
Okay, I already agreed with
that. Can you do? So then we're going on a pedantic point for absolutely no reason.
Okay. Well, part of the reason is because you didn't articulate what you meant very well, and also part
Maybe
of it is
you
because
could let me finish.
you made claims that were false. But whatever, that's fine.
Wait,
if you want to just move off of it, we can. Because actually, I want to go back to gender.
But that's what I'm
at
talking
some
about.
point, and you got to go soon.
Yeah. Either way, my entire point actually didn't even hinge on whether or not we could measure people having values or not having values. My whole point was about religion and the fact that there was a sophistication of those expectations that are coming of gender expectations through religion by redefining what is the best way to behave if you are this. What is the best way to behave if you are that? It's like these are things that people value as the best way to do something. That is subjective, is it not?
Individuals valuing things this or that way is subjective for sure.
So it's like, sure, there are expectations that are put on males at large, because that's like, once people start to like agree, like, hey, this might be the best way to do things, like that is a social component of any sort of complex social hierarchy. You start to meld values together. At least they at least overlap in a certain way, and religion very much helps with that. Does it not?
Religion impacts the overall dimensions of what you're talking about on a societal scale. To say that religion helps it is to turn a blind eye to all of the ways in which religious presuppositions and tenets have actually exacerbated certain kinds of tensions that have caused a lot of kinds of conflicts throughout human history.
I mean, the same thing.
A lot of wars, in fact, a lot of wars can break out that are sparked by conflicts and values. In fact, you have people talking increasingly in the United States context about the prospects of another American Civil War in virtue of the culture wars, in virtue of what seemed to be irresolvable conflicts in sets of values, right?
I mean, same thing could be said with any sort of belief system, whether it be measured objectively or not.
I agree.
Like,
the only point I'm making,
for example, phrenology,
we don't
which is
have
something.
time for you to elaborate like this, dude.
Yeah, but but we went off on.
I don't need you to give me the is of phrenology. The only point I'm trying to make is very simple. Okay, it's not quite accurate to say that religion has only helped and has not actually added to the harms.
But Jason,
that's my point.
Jason, that's not even a point I'm making. Like, I'm not even saying that it only helped. Like, you're going completely
so then you agree
past. But Jason, obviously.
Okay, cool. So then you don't have to give me a rebuttal. So I want to go back to gender now.
But I was going towards there, and you deviated me again.
I didn't deviate you. I responded to
Jason,
what you said. You
Jason,
said a sentence. You stopped talking. I started talking. That's how this works.
I look. My whole point is that there was an increase in sophistication as to what a man or a woman is, what their purpose is, and what the best way of going about their lives is, and that is a subjective thing. I said nothing about religion hurting, not ever hurting anybody or whatever.
I'm gonna. Oh God, go ahead,
dude. I've been trying to get at this for like 20 minutes. When you're talking about what's it called? Like, this is a counterclaim on their part. The fact that there shouldn't be any sort of boundaries as to what someone can consider the purpose of their life is and the way they live their lives, based on just what they were, the equipment they were born with, for lack of a better word, their biology. This is something that is subjective. You're allowed to do that. Like, no one really can force you to view yourself only within those boundaries. But the point that they're making is that not only do they, like, you yourself, you're able to like not see yourself within those boundaries, but you have to get other people to view you somewhere else within those boundaries. And that in itself is part of the treatment, which is why they change themselves aesthetically. Because if you didn't want other people to also view you as someone who can just shift anywhere and everywhere, you wouldn't change aesthetically. It would just be an internal feeling, which would then be, change the way you express yourself or whatever, and you wouldn't care what other people think. It's like that social component of other people viewing you is part of the dysphoria. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like you're meeting those expectations, and you want other people to recognize that you've met those expectations.
But that's an overly simplistic way of describing the variations of how gender dysphoria manifests itself for various different trans and non-binary people. It doesn't always take the form of a person deciding that they want to change their what you keep calling the aesthetics of their body to fit certain preconceived notions of what a particular kind of gendered body looks like. There are people who are perfectly fine living life the way that they are in terms of like not altering their bodies at all. But for the forms of discrimination and persecution they will get, because people are going to look at them and then make all kinds of assumptions about what their pronouns are, all kinds of assumptions about what their behavioral patterns are, all kinds of assumptions about even maybe their sexual proclivities, all kinds of assumptions that may not fit the individual in question. And so there's an undeniable social pressure in virtue of a lot of these presuppositions related to gender identity that are very often not questioned, and that people based on which people operate in the world. And so that actually undergirds the social pressure to do the kinds of things that these people otherwise wouldn't even want to do. It will be a lot easier, for example, if I want to be taken seriously as a woman, to not look the way I actually look right now, because a lot of people are going to see this aesthetic and they're going to think male, and that's triggering to me if I'm experiencing a certain kind of gender dysphoria and I genuinely think of myself as a woman. That's the kind of issue at play here. And so it's not merely about the aesthetic change. It's more like, given that it's way easier for me to undergo bottom surgeries and things like that than it is to change all of the presuppositions of society, then that seems like I'm relegated to that only as a recourse, right? Also, part of what people try to do is do the slow but sure chipping away at those unexamined assumptions, which they consider biological determinism, which they think of as an inherently oppressive ideology or set of ideas, let's say, that certain biological realities determine your gender identity. What they're saying is actually gender doesn't work that way. That's one of their core contingents, that a person can identify as a woman and not have the relevant biological realities that we typically associate with that. Okay. That's what they're trying to argue. So it's not quite, your articulation of their position is not quite accurate either. And then the other thing that I want to go back to, and I'm almost done because I know you got to go. The other thing I want to go back to is, it's not quite accurate to say that religion specifically has made a more sophisticated conception of what our expectations are around men and women, because precisely the contention of a lot of the people that I'm attempting to steelman and describe is that actually religion has done the most damage in terms of influencing our social expectations around what a man and a woman even are in the first place, that are counter to science and scientific realities, and all of the studies that they cite that are around the differences in the relationship between gender and biology, or gender and sex. Like that, their whole contention is actually religion has made this worse, and we need to undo that. There's a whole bunch of ways that they would argue that it has. The main point, because we don't have time to get into the specifics, but
can you give me
I'll give you one example. I'll give you one example. So the idea that man was made in God's image, right?
That's not part of my religion.
There's a certain kind of what?
That's actually something we completely deny in my religion.
Okay, fine, but it's still a religious precept that has influenced our conception of gender in this country, though, because Islam is not the only like. First of all, I don't even know that Islam is like one of the biggest religious influencers. It seems like Christianity and Judaism are bigger than Islam in this country. But regardless, the point I'm making is the only point I'm trying to make is that that's an example of a religious precept. That's an example of a religious precept that undergirds a whole bunch of social and cultural milieu around what the expectations of a man's role in life is, that he has to be the breadwinner and that the woman has to be the caretaker, and that particular conception of gender roles has been instantiated and inculcated in our society for decades, bro.
So that didn't exist before Christianity?
Of course, no, yeah, of course it did in various different ways, but it didn't look the same. But my point is that it's influenced our conceptions in the modern age.
No, but hold on. It didn't look the same in what way?
It didn't look the same in a lot of different ways. So, for example, one of the practices that were associated with the pre-Christian age of Judaism was like polyamory. But what is it when you marry multiple people? Polygamy. Like that practice has been mostly condemned in our modern context, but like that would have been perfectly fine back in Christian days. In fact, there are many figures in the Bible who had multiple wives in like Christian times.
But like, when is that? What are you talking about?
Like the time, well, also pre-Christian times that are mentioned in the Bible. So like, which comes from the Old Testament. So the times of the Israelites or the Hebrews or whatever. I don't know if I'm using the right terminology for that. And then like when Christianity had its heyday in the medieval period, I remember that like Christianity was really huge. And then I don't know exactly what time period the inception of like when Christianity first became kind of like a major religion. I know Byzantium is part of that in the medieval period, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, Byzantine was what's it called, post the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So that was like
okay. So then the Holy Roman Empire as well is a part of it. Yeah, but I don't. Go ahead.
The Holy Roman Empire came about in the 1100s.
Okay, fine. So take that. But my point is like those have influenced the way in the West that we think of these gender roles. Is my point. That's all I'm trying to say.
No, but my point is like those gender roles very likely, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find what's it called, like examples of those conceptions that didn't go past, well, at least that didn't exist Christianity. It's like we have examples of this, and from even back in like Babylonian
I agree.
But that's my entire point, to say that it is only that is the main belief system that came about in the West, but the expectations of men and women behaving a certain way, it being just biological determinism and being only coming from like religious conceptions, I don't think is completely true.
That's not what I said. What I'm saying, oh my God, I'm saying that there are certain presuppositions about expectations regarding men and women that have been influenced by religion that a lot of the people left of center who actually sincerely hold these views would point to and say they've actually made things worse, not better. Your contention was that religion has made it more sophisticated and some shit. And what I'm saying is that's a highly controversial and biased claim.
From a pre-religion, from a pre-religious conception of what's it called? A pre-religious conception of life and purpose, going from like, for example, like a primitive sort of social hierarchy where there were most definitely expectations depending on your gender or your sex. Actually, religion has made that more sophisticated, and that was my point. And the whole point I'm saying this is because it refined what the actions of a man would need to be in order to exist within a certain social hierarchy. Whereas what I'm talking about is
like a hunter-gatherer society, for example.
Yeah, something like that, for example. Whereas there were much more, and as far as anthropological studies that I've seen on this, there were much less differences, and we see this as well in like really primitive cultures that still exist today. There are less differences in like the roles that people play within a tribe, just because of necessity and survivability. Like you'll see a lot more occurrences of women doing certain things that would usually be regarded as like a male only what's it called?
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is religion in itself has refined and sophisticated those roles to specifically like take advantage more efficiently of what each population is actually capable of. And that has come along with what's it called, like social development, well, at least technological development and social development over millennia. Like, I don't think that's a controversial thing to say at all. And
I mean, if your comparison is like Neanderthals or like hunter-gatherer,
not Neanderthals,
like
but we
primitive human societies, and
no, I mean, look
just
at
step up over that. Okay, fine, but like we're
we
talking about
have
comparing
examples of people
like the
that are alive
Byzantium
today.
fucking medieval times age to like now in 2022, and so some people might argue that actually a lot of these old-fashioned religious precepts and ideals haven't changed with the times. As our makeup and the nature of our interaction has changed, like you need to keep up. And so it's a lot less obvious now why having some kind of social expectation that prohibits men to lie with men, as in the Sodom and Gomorrah days mentioned in the Bible, for example, makes sense now in 2022 versus during a time where we didn't understand how sexually transmitted diseases work. There was a huge reliance in terms of the way that certain societies organized that made it really, really, really important for men to have certain roles in that context of that society, etc. Like when all of those realities change, but yet the moral precepts around what human beings are expected to do based on gender don't change. Some people would say that that's a fair criticism, and that to that extent, religion has actually not made things more sophisticated. It has actually halted progress, and that is actually the kind of argument that these people make.
Okay, if we're talking about halting progress as having actually defined and what's it called, like there are certain axioms that are actually being reasoned from within that belief system, and having those axioms and those axioms not changing. And if they did change, it would be something different. As a matter of fact, it would be a different religion. It's like that's not really much of a what's it called. It's not that it's halting it as much as it is preserving certain axioms that it believes to be true within it. It's like when we're talking about this progress per se, we're exploring new axioms and then coming and deducing new values from them, which is what these people are saying essentially. Like, okay, so if we're starting from a standpoint that, for example, gay marriage is not bad, what can we then deduce? Then it is, if you come from that axiom, then you can actually deduce like, well, keeping people from doing it is immoral, right? Or harming people for doing it is immoral.
I don't think they start there. I think they start by asking the question, on what basis can we hold gay marriage to be bad in the first place? They start by questioning the presuppositions of the religious tenets that's preceded it historically, not just arbitrarily declaring it okay.
Of course. I mean, but look, we're talking about a period in time, like as far as the recency of like what's it called, infant mortality and the occurrences of like death in pregnancy and such. Fertility has been something that's like the basis for some other religions, to be honest. Like that, this is not a trivial thing. And for someone to actually, but for someone to infer that the ban on gay marriage in that period, based on the realities that they were facing, was something that was like just straight up out of the ether or just hatefulness. I think that's like a misunderstanding of like what human beings do and why they do them. It's like if you are facing like extinction from not only the outside but also your fertility, there are certain things that you will do to try to ensure your survivability.
I agree.
And a certain type of behavior, which has, I'm not just trying to get you to agree. I'm trying to express the full thought. Like certain, no, but there are people going to be watching this. But I want them to understand what I'm saying. The whole point is like, if there are certain behaviors that you observe to be less likely to ensue in your societal progress or in your even like survivability, it would entail certain restrictions or certain expectations or certain ideals per se. It's like
I get it. There are a whole bunch of what people may rightly or justly or unjustly describe as old-fashioned, antiquated, or even barbaric practices back then that made more sense back then, given the state of technology, given the state of human existence back then, that don't make much sense now. And it's precisely that I'm trying to draw your attention to, because that undergirds a lot of the conceptions or perceptions that a lot of the religious values and precepts that a lot of traditionalist type people, which typically are on the conservative right of center side, hold on to as gospel for all of the usual religious reasons. Right. What a lot of the quote unquote progressive types are trying to point out is that a lot of that stuff doesn't apply anymore. And so we need to reevaluate our value systems in light of all of our modernizations.
Well, who's we?
Human beings, our society, human beings in our society.
But that's the thing. It's like, how are you to decide that we will reevaluate our values? I don't think that's something you can
But they
really
could
do.
flip that on you and go, who are you to decide that we have to stay true to all of these old ass values and ways
Who's
of living?
we?
Human
I don't care what
beings
you
in
do.
our society.
But that's the thing. We don't operate as human beings as a society. We operate in cooperation as individuals.
If a gay person before Obergefell wanted to marry someone of the same sex, there were a whole bunch of societal restrictions against it.
Not societal.
Yet legally they could not do it.
Yes,
that's part of society. Is the government not part of society?
That's the state.
Is the state not a part of a society, Ibrahima?
Sure, that's fine. So some societies have
societal.
States. Hold on.
Societal.
Hold on a
Societal.
second. Look, can we be more careful about this, or can we?
Dude, it's gonna be immaterial to the point I just made. So you're about to be pedantic,
yes,
according to your own standards.
No, actually, so a society cannot exist without a state.
Of course, it can.
So, is it inherently part of society, or is it a feature?
I never said it was.
It's
a feature in our actual society.
It's a feature in our society,
and I'm trying
to tell you, we can have a societal conception of this that doesn't involve the state whatsoever.
Not if we're talking about reality, because we actually have a state in our society, right?
Oh my God.
Right,
but the whole issue,
what I was talking about. I'm talking about reality. I'm not talking about hypothetically living in a society that doesn't have a fucking government. I'm talking about right now in the status quo.
But if we're talking about reality, go on a what's it called, on an Indian reservation and try to apply federal law there. It doesn't apply. They have their own justice system.
Dude. That's immaterial to the point I'm making. It doesn't matter what you do. What?
But dude, it does actually. It does. But my whole entire point is that the crux of that issue is that the state is intervening within within a consensual association between two people. The state is, right? It's not people. It's not people walking around on the street
because it wasn't against the law.
It's not people walking around the street.
Well, there were those too, because they were protesting the overturning of those laws.
Were they going around physically stopping? No. Can I finish my sentence, or are you going to tell me what I'm going to say?
Well, I'm kind of losing my patience because you're interrupting me for dumb reasons and making points that are immaterial to the point I'm making, and they're not refuting it at all. And all you're going to do is say that you didn't say X, Y, and Z, and you're going to end up agreeing with me anyway.
If I say something, is it just for the purpose of refuting you, or am I trying to add nuance?
Okay, but you interrupted me to make a point that's irrelevant to the point I'm trying to make right now. That's frustrating, dude.
All I said was that it's not necessarily part of what a society is if it doesn't include the state. The state itself is the issue. It's like we can have societies that have completely differing values.
Fine,
I've already conceded already.
Can I make my point now?
So then what was the whole point of that?
Okay, so my point is that we live in a society in which before Obergefell, individuals who wanted to get married to people of the same sex couldn't, because there were a whole bunch of societal barriers, i.e. laws that prohibited it. You tried to make it seem like it wasn't a part of society because it was the government. It's like, what? Government's a part of the society, dude. What? I don't understand. That was dumb. That was a waste of time, and we don't have that much left. So that's what's frustrating.
So hold on a second. Hold on.
All right, I'm gonna ignore you now because I want to make a point that I've been trying to make for a while. And so here's the point I'm trying to make right now. So I wanted to do this a long time ago, but you kept pontificating about random shit. Gender dysphoria, I wanted to define it from the DSM-5. Because we never find it when you brought it up. A concept designated in the DSM-5 as clinically significant distress or impairment related to gender incongruence, which may include desire to change primary and or secondary sex characteristics. Not all transgender or gender diverse people experience gender dysphoria. I wanted to make that clear because you were talking about gender dysphoria as though it were uniform in terms of the experience of people. It was a point I made earlier, but I wanted to underscore it. I'll probably end up editing this and putting this where it's supposed to be, but I just wanted to make sure that I got to that before you ran out of time. And then the last thing I'm going to ask you, because I know you got to go, is when it comes to that scathing review of What is a Woman, the individual who was criticizing Matt Walsh seems to be getting at something we've been talking about, and this I think would be a great place to end with, which is the extent to which religion actually doesn't make things better, but makes things worse in terms of this entire discourse. That a lot of what people left of center and people who are not religious would view as antiquated presuppositions or ideas around what the proper gender roles for men and women are, indeed what it even makes sense to consider a man or a woman, are actually more religiously influenced than meets the eye. And so when you have a documentary like Matt Walsh's documentary, that there's a kind of interesting question about the extent to which those religious precepts are being smuggled into the documentary and operating kind of on a base level, on a non-explicit level. And it's precisely those religious presuppositions that undergird the idea that in some sense, transgenderism is illegitimate, and that what trans people really are men pretending to be women and women pretending to be men and nothing else. What do you say to that?
I say to that there are definitely to say that they're just antiquated and unhelpful ways of conceptualizing the roles of men and women is essentially assuming that they're like the way that was set up was almost in a I guess antiquated, it kind of like qualifies that. But to say that there are realities that no longer exist at all that would be usefully served by having your purpose defined by that identity, which I think is really the purpose of an identity, like to define how you behave and the way you do things, the way you carry yourself, the way you expect to behave, the way you expect to live your life or whatever. To say that the realities are so different now that those things cannot apply and that they're almost harmful, I think is in itself a value judgment, and also in certain ways subjective, not always. There are certain things, like, for example, we touched on it as far as like the legal implications of choosing to do certain things, which essentially is enforced by a state rather than by individuals per se. If you aren't able to explore for yourself what that may be, I do see that as a problem. If you are living in a society that does consider itself to be free, but the actual critique of religion in itself having like harmed per se, I think there's a lot more to be considered before you can make that as a definitive judgment. Do you understand what I mean? It's like there are certain things that are considered to be antiquated just because people would say in general, like, I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be this way. But that's usually without considering second and third order consequences of certain behaviors. And that's something that I see that undergirds a lot of those ideologies, which is, I don't see any reason why I shouldn't do it. Therefore, we should be able to do it freely. And to say that you shouldn't do it is actually just oppression.
Yeah, I mean, I understand you. I don't think that's accurate. I think that there's a valid critique of religion and the extent to which religious precepts have influenced our common understanding now in the West generally, particularly coming from conservatives, around what our social expectations for men and women are. I think that we can ground a lot of them in kind of rationality and basic biological realities, but the extent to which we can do that without running afoul or becoming guilty of various forms of unjust discrimination or oppression of certain people who don't quite fit nicely into those boxes is actually a fair thing to investigate. And I think that the people who are critical of the kind of traditional conceptions of gender that we have a point, and I'm willing to go that far with them. I think that some of the claims that they make are ridiculous, and they come really, really close to denying basic, easily verifiable realities of biology. In order to underscore, I think, the part that of their contentions that are actually valid, which is that the ways in which you organize our society are not necessarily the most attentive to various forms of oppression that befall specifically trans and non-binary people. But some of them go so far as to say that basic facts of reality are transphobic, and I think that that's stupid. So I'm kind of in the middle somewhat. I tried to give voice to the parts. Well, I tried to give voice to all of it, and still, man, all of it. But there's certain parts I actually genuinely agree with, and I tried to give voice to those in the end. I know you got to go. You're kind of already over, so I want to give you a last opportunity to say goodbye, and then we're going to close out.
All right. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for the deal. And, let's see that climate change debate soon, though.
You know I'm about to talk shit about you when I take you off, right?
Of course you are. Listen, I can't. We're not all good men. You know what I'm saying? We can't.
I'm about to talk so much shit right now, bro.
That's fine.
I'm about to talk shit.
We can't all be honorable men. That's all right.
Yo, last time that was so funny. I actually didn't even think to do that until after. That I was just like, I knew you was back on. I actually didn't plan on doing it. It was in the spur of the moment I got mad, but all right.
I knew you was
bring you off and talk shit like I love. All right, peace to Ibrahima. All right, that has been the Black Muse podcast. I'm not really gonna talk shit. I was just playing around. I do have genuine disagreements. I think Ibrahima and I got genuinely frustrated at some points. I think that the genuineness of the disagreement is cool, but I like that Ibrahima is always willing to come back and come to the table and keep debating it. And hopefully he won't get too mad. He left my like back room thing right now because I think he thinks I'm going to talk shit, but I think he might be pleasantly surprised. I'm not really trying to talk shit. But yeah, that's been the Black Muse podcast. I think that's the second in several more series to come on this documentary. This documentary actually has a lot of things to talk about that I want to explore philosophically. So this may end up being 3, 4, 5, 6 parts. I don't know yet. But we're just going to keep unpacking, some with Ibrahima, some with other guests. Can't wait to start having other guests other than just Ibrahima, and we might have multiple guests at the same time. So this has been the Black Muse podcast. Until next time, peace.